Okay, hello everyone. So today I'm going to do some practice with Relational Star Schema. So far we have covered all these slides for the data warehouse, but we didn't have time to do some hands-on practice to create Star Schema. So I'm going to first start with a practice including how to use ERD plus to create a star schema, adding facts, dimensions, and while we're doing this, I'm also explaining or reviewing how to define or identify your facts tables, plus your dimensions that you have to do with connection. So here you can see a dimensional model for a star schema. And as we've covered before, the fact table is always in the center of your star schema. And all the dimension tables, which are basically providing additional information, are stored in the dimension tables, right? And this is because we want to make the analysis faster and easier. So instead of storing tables in a relational tables or relational databases, relational schema, where several tables were connected to each other. Now here we have one central repository or one central fact table, which includes the measure of our analysis, for example, sales or defects. Or anything, payments, so it could be different things. So here, for example, in the examples we had in the class, the subject of analysis was sale, so the fact table is sale with, for example, let's say total sale as a measure of the fact table, right? And then your fact table, because it is connected to all the dimensions, it always stores the foreign keys, which are basically primary keys of all the dimensions. Another point about the dimension table is that you have to define the surrogate key, because just to avoid a primary key that is going to be repeated. Because if you use the original primary keys which we use in the relational schema, for example, let's say if you use let's say this is product, for example, dimension, right? So we had product ID, which is your primary key. And if for any reason you want to update some information in the product dimension, we cannot do that directly. We cannot do that update directly to the rules of, for example, the table in your star schema. What you need to do is to insert a new record with the updated information. And if you do that, let's say if you update the price, then you have product ID repeated, right? Because you have one product ID, let's say with one price, $100. If you want to update the price to, for example, 200, now you will come up with product ID, which was your primary key repeated. That is why we are adding surrogate keys for a star schema. It's not shown here, but we do that. And so you can just add, for example, product key, time key, and etc. to just show the surrogate keys. All the dimensions are connected to a fact table through many to one relationship, right? Because you are analyzing sales, which is in the fact table, over different dimensions. Now, for example, the relationship between sale and product, right? So these all these relationships are one-to-many, and all these foreign keys are appearing into your fact table, right? So your fact table is basically the attributes of the fact table are only the measures, for example, sales quantity, amount, etc., plus all the foreign keys. And in your dimension, if you want to identify which, for example, attribute to include in your dimension, you have to just see which ones are relevant for your analysis. It depends on the analysis. So, for example, if for example, product, color, size, etc. are relevant, then you have to add. And so let's take, because I already covered the theoretical parts of the star schema, I'm going to use ERD plus now So you can go to ERD plus here. So you just add a new diagram here, right? And then for the type, you just select relational schema, which can be used also for a star schema here. And then let's say star schema. So now here, we just, for example, let's do it with the example we covered in class. So how can I add a new fact table? Easy, just here, you see the table on the top, so you add the table here. And this is a fact table, so you can identify it as fact table if you check it here. So this is your fact table. Then you just name the table. For example, sales fact table. Right? And then here you have also the option to add the columns, which are the attributes of your fact table. Is it clear, or would you like me to zoom in? Good. Can you see the screen? Okay, great. So let's say this is your fact table, and before I add the columns of the fact table, you can add just the measure at this point. For example, let's say adding the total sales, right? And we leave it here as is, because then later when we add the dimensions, all the foreign keys will be automatically added. So we are going to add another table. So we're going to add the dimension table now. So at this point, you see which dimensions are relevant for your analysis. For example, is it relevant to analyze sales over time? Yes. So you have to ask two questions to add any dimension. First, is that relevant? For example, is analyzing sales over time relevant for your analysis? Yes, we want to analyze sales over time. For example, sales in the past 1 to 2 years. And second, do you have that information in your, for example, if your sources come from your relational schema in your operational databases, do you have that information? So back to the slides. If you see here, if you see your relational schema or your, like the tables in your transactional operational databases, you can see that in the sales transaction, we have transaction date, right? So we have date information, including day, month, and year, right? So we can extract that information. Also, because we have the month, we can also extract which quarter of the year it is in, right? So you can add, actually, even though you do not have the table itself, but you can add the time dimension here. So is it a fact table? No. So you don't have to check it here anymore. Just adding the time dimension. Then adding the color. So what information do you think you need for the time dimension? What should I add here?
The day.
Day, year, right? So if it depends on how you want to analyze over time, on a daily basis, for example, yearly basis, and so on. So you're going to add a new column, which is, for example, you can have your date, which is basically what you already had for transaction date, whatever name you like. You can also select the type of the data here. For example, this could be date. And then adding another column, for example, for year. So this could be the year, which can be integer. Then adding month, which could be char and right. Next. Adding year, month, day, right? For example, this could be day of month. For example, January 5, January 10, etc. You could also using SQL function, you can also extract day of the week, which is it Saturday, Monday, Tuesday, etc. So for example, let's say this is day of the month, which can be integer, and we can also have product Q1, Q2, Q3, Q4. So what is the data type? I can use char, right? I can use char, and length would be 2. And what else? So this is about your time dimension, and you can easily add other dimensions similarly. Like for example, adding next dimension is what are the other dimensions? What other analysis or what other entities relevant analyze states?
Product, like the different.
Yeah, so we have also product. What are the attributes or columns of the product dimension? Product ID name, right? So you will have, for example, ID could be integer or let's say this is product name. And you can have what other product information you need. You may want to also see the price. And what else? I'm going back to the slide, so you tell me which information are relevant about the product. So we already have product ID, name, price, and we may want to have, instead of vendor ID, category ID, we may want to store vendor name and category name, right? Which are stored in the vendor and category information, but that's no problem. We said that in the Star Schema, we often merge or join the tables that are relevant to one entity into one dimension. For example, these 3 entities are all providing information about products, so we can put them in one dimension table. Why do we do that? Why don't we just leave it in separate tables? Why? So what else? So why don't we keep it like product, vendor, category? Why I'm not adding another dimension, for example, vendor dimension? Yes.
Is it so that you don't have to do a bunch of complex joins?
Yeah, we don't want to reduce the number of joins. We want to make the analysis faster, right? So we are going to include, we want to try to denormalize tables, right? So having fewer, for example, tables most of the time. But as I mentioned, if you are, for example, in real world, because you have several fact tables, you may even end up with more number of tables in your Star Schema. But for the sake of this class, and for example for your exam, you will come up with less number of tables in your Star Schema. And so these 3 information are going to be in the product dimension, right? So we have here, for example, vendor name. And then that's, so what is missing here? Yeah, customer, but in terms of each dimension, what each dimension is missing right now?
The key.
The key, right? So we also have to add the target key. So for example, for this one, I'm going to add time key, right? And this could be your primary key, right? So you select your primary key like this. You have to check this column and then save it. So now you have time key here. So now if you connect your dimension to your fact table, and how do you do that? You have to first enable the connect here. So you have to check this. And then you do like this, right? So now the time key is added here. Similarly for the product table, if you try to add it now like this, we cannot connect these two because you have not added your key yet. And if this doesn't have primary key, you cannot connect to tables, right? Because you need a foreign key. You need a common attribute. So I'm going to the product table. You have to again disable this, select product, and adding, let's say, product key. Sorry? Product ID is a primary key, right? In your relational schema. As I mentioned, that could be repeated in data warehouse. Because if you're going, for example, to update the name of the product or price or something, then you cannot directly update that row. You have to insert a new row which caused the primary key to be repeated. So that primary key is not useful here anymore. You have to add a surrogate key. Now, adding a primary key, product key, save, right? Now I can connect product to sales fact table, and this key is also added, this foreign key is added here. And the same way you're adding customer dimension, so I'm going to also add customer here. And let's say you have customer ID. I keep customer ID intentionally because I want to show that we don't use this primary key here anymore, right? And customer name. What other customer information you need? Let's see the table that we have. So in your relational schema here, you have customer name, customers with what other customer information? Nothing else, right? So these are all the customer information that you have. This is the info that you have here. Adding, for example, here in this case we also added. Later, if you recall in your slides, later we added also more information when we were covering multiple sources for data warehouse, right? Because we said that the data for your data warehouse can come from different sources. One source could be your operational database, which means you have, for example, some tables in your operational database, which is basically what we did so far. So we looked at the tables, we saw which information we have, which information are relevant for each dimension, and we included them here. But recall, we could also add information from multiple sources. So I'm going to add and show you those information. So as you see, those additional information, for example, for the customer, our customer gender, marital status, and so on. These are customer, for example, demographic information, right? Which could come from another source. And same thing, for example, for the store, we added store layout, store size, and so on, again, coming from a different source. So you can see all these. And these are we already added them, but these were also not explicitly provided in the tables in our operational database, right? We just created them using the SQL functions. And then what else? And that's so you can also add those customer information here, but customer gender, whatever information that you think for your analysis might be useful. For example, you may want to see sales of a specific product across different genders, across different age groups, and so on. So these could be all relevant. And here would be gender, for example, male, female. Pixels, let's say 10. Page group. What else? Got here. Customer difficult. What other dimension can I add? So I also have to add the key here. So let's also do that. Customer key. Customer key's integer is a surrogate key, and then we find the primary key, which is here, and then we have that. We can connect these also to the sales back data. This way, we also added the customer key to the sales back data. You can also have more than one measure in your fact table. I included only one, but you can have more than one measure here. And what other dimension? There was one more dimension here. We are analyzing sales over time, across different products, different customers, and also different regions and locations, right? So we want to add also the this dimension. After this table, connect to the table. And then for location, I'm adding location key as a surrogate key. What location information do we have based on our ER model? So let me show you that. So what location information do we have? We have region information, right? We also have a store location information, which is here. So we have a store zip, for example, and then that's it. So we can also add that. And so on. I don't remember the other ones. And then now you can also connect sales fact table to location. And then location key is also added here. So how many foreign keys do we have in your sales fact table? As many as you have dimension tables, right? And in your Star Schema, you always connect these dimensions to your fact table. Now you can also have more than one fact table, right? So you may want to add another fact table here. What other fact table could be relevant? Returns, for example, right? Or in your in the slide, you have an example of effects. Could be different things. So do we have any volunteer to add the other fact table and complete the Star Schema with a bonus point? With 0.5% bonus, do we have anyone want to add the return or maybe defects fact table? Come on, like you may get 79.5 at the end and you went 1 minute. You may need to increase your grade, or maybe this is a chance to increase your grade now. Yes? Yep. Okay. So for those grade students, I also provide answer here. So
Just an odd second.
Yeah.
Yeah. So hard to be that kind of I don't connect to small. You're spreading out.
Sorry, why did you connect the two fact tables together? Oh, we need two fact tables. So you can just undo that.
I did that before.
Yeah. So you only connect the fact tables to the dimensions. Now you have to see which dimensions are relevant to analyze defects, right? For example, we may want to analyze defects, for example, over time, right?
Replicants, there's so
So we
fun.
can use the time.
Yeah.
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 I don't think we're gonna see any check
And location.
Yeah.
And then
With the customer obviously.
Well, the guys
we may not,
Yeah.
it depends, but I thought
Yeah, how do you guys
because
make
we
sure?
just want to see which products have been verified at which time, but you
Oh,
also
We got something like the
why
same.
would we
Yeah. Have you gotten any more?
Yeah. To get rid of the system.
Maybe they're being minutes and we need to take notes. And so I just need to add a function.
Yeah, that's obviously at the end. Okay.
So we have
Yeah, that's the most annoying.
you can see it here, right? So
That's like
you
majority of the work is the team meetings. and
it's
like,
okay, you
guys,
don't need to
stuff.
add everything here. Even in your exam, even in your exam, your star schema might be slightly different from each other, right? So you may, for example, add, I don't know, 7 attributes for a specific dimension, while another student having 6 or more, and there could be different. But the things that I'm looking for are correct fact table, correct dimensions, and of course adding the keys for each dimension and seeing the foreign keys there. Correct link between, if for example you have 2 fact tables or more, I want to see also the correct link between the fact and dimensions. For example, in this example, both facts are sharing 3 dimensions out of 4. So these are the important things. But like some details, like for example, for the customer, some of you may not include, I don't know, for example, address. But that's okay if you already provided few relevant customer information. Okay, thank you so much. Just give me your names. Yes, that's
Yeah.
so I'm bombarding you with bonus points. Now, everyone are okay with the using ER plus to create star schema?
I had a question. Why do we have the defects key for the defects fact table, but no like key for the sales fact table?
Why don't we have what for the sales fact table?
Like a surrogate key. Like for defects fact table, we have defect key, but for sales fact table, we don't have key.
Oopsies.
Because of that.
Oh, okay.
Yes.
So they both should have.
Yeah, and thanks for that. So you can also add, for example, a primary key for the sales fact table could be, for example, your transaction ID, right? Or any surrogate key. And what else? So let me go through. Do you have any questions about using a star schema? Using ERP Plus to create a star schema? No? Do you have any questions about how to create star schema? For example, how to identify facts, how to identify measures, how to identify dimensions, and so on?
So for the fact tables also need a primary key or a surrogate key?
I think you can only add primary key because we want to analyze the measures in the fact table over different things, right? So I guess the primary key is okay. Yeah. If later, like at any time, even if you're in your operational databases, you can add these keys later. If you see, for example, you make any updates that cause, for example, the primary keys to be duplicated, then you can.
Okay.
And yeah, because I don't think that let's think about that. If you have, for example, transaction ID mistakes like table. Not really, because what do you store in the fact table? Most of the columns come from the dimensions, which are the parameters, right? Except for the measure of your analysis, which is not going to be updated, right? Which is something that you want to measure. So that's okay. You can just add the normal. And so, yeah. It has defect ID.
No, I need to slide.
In the slides,
Back table is the primary analysis.
we have it here for the defect fact table, defect ID, and also you have it for the defect fact.